Okay, it's 10:30. Let's get started. We're finally to the good stuff, guys. Now that we're all sick of soil science, we're going to talk about the good stuff. This is where we get into soil fertility and really the most important part of soil science is soil fertility. So let me share my screen here and we'll go through 17.1. I think this is lecture 17.1. And essential plant nutrients, okay? So these are ones that you want to commit to memory. They are hydrogen, and as we move across the periodic table, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and then magnesium, phosphorus, sulfur, chloride. Actually, that's not chloride, is it? It's chlorine. But usually when we talk about chlorine, it's in the anionic form, so negatively charged, and we call that chloride. Potassium, calcium, manganese, iron, nickel, copper, zinc, and down here by itself is molybdenum. So those are the important ones in soil science. Now let's split these up into a couple different things, okay? First of all, these three right here are derived from water or the air. So carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, these aren't anything that we have to add to the plant. This is something that the plant gets for free, either from the air, so they get CO2, through the photosynthetic process. They can get hydrogen through the water, and then oxygen can be had through either the air or the water. So those usually, we'd never say that a plant has a carbon or an oxygen deficiency. I guess unless we were growing them in somewhere that had no oxygen, but I think that would be exceedingly rare. These three, we call them the structural atoms, okay? These are part of the building blocks for the plant. So we call them structural, the backbone of plant structural matter. Okay, and then these other 13 are the ones that the plant gets out of the soil and are the essential nutrients. Okay, you'll notice that nickel does not make an appearance here. It did on the last one. And nickel kind of lives in the fuzzy area, okay? Some people say that nickel, you've got to have it. And I've been in soil science for, gosh, I'm coming up on 20 years now. And I've never seen a nickel deficiency. It just doesn't really exist. So, yeah, these are the important ones to remember. NPKs. Calcium, magnesium, sulfur, boron, zinc, manganese, copper, and iron, and then molybdenum. All right, let's break these down even further, okay? So of these essential nutrients that we have left, these 6 right here are what we call macronutrients, okay? And what macro means is that they are needed by plants in fairly large quantities, okay? NPK, and then sulfur, magnesium, and calcium. These are the macronutrients. And each has a specific role, okay? These are the kind of what we call the big 3. NP, S, where's the K? Why are these divided like this? Oh, I know why. These 3 right here are typically taken up in the plant as an anion, so that's something that's negatively charged. But we know with nitrogen, it can be taken up as either nitrate, which is negatively charged, or ammonium. Phosphorus is usually negatively charged, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Sulfur is as well. Now, these 3 have different functions in the plant. So for nitrogen, it's involved in production of proteins and amino acids. And that's in turn how we get DNA and RNA, you know, the stuff that codes for the genetic makeup of the plant. Okay, and it's taken up as nitrate and ammonium. So P, this is important for energy transfer. And let me make another screen share here. With the whiteboard. Okay, anyone feeling especially smart today and that's taken biology class and can tell us what this stands for? I know you know, Joe. Tell me. No joy? Okay. ATP. ATP is, it stands for adenosine triphosphate. Okay. And this lives in the mitochondrial part of a cell. Okay. And we know that mitochondria is where the powerhouse of the cell is. Again, adenosine triphosphate. Okay. And we know that this element right here is phosphorus. Basically, what happens is the phosphorus making up this part of the energy distribution system of the plant. If phosphorus is deficient, we end up having problems in our plant. And generally, they manifest themselves in making plants look like they don't have any energy, okay? And so generally we get like short, stunted plants when we have a phosphorus deficiency. And the reason is it doesn't have enough ATP to properly do the energy transfers that are needed. Okay, let's go back to here. Okay, so energy transfer and also an important component in genetic material. And sulfur, we'll get there in just a second. Before that, P is taken up in various forms, but it usually takes like an orthophosphate type form. So again, negatively charged phosphorus with some oxygens. Sometimes there's some hydrogens in there as well, but we'll talk about that in another class. Okay, sulfur is used in manufacture of proteins within the plant and also essential oils. Wow, essential oils. Maybe we should sell some, huh? As a joke. Great, and sulfur is taken up in the sulfate form. Okay, negatively charged. All right, these three right here, excuse me, I'm tired. These three right here are what we call the basic cations. And we've talked about this before, right? Haven't we? We know that these are the basic cations. And their function in the plant is they get taken up as cations, of course. All right. Magnesium is an integral part of chlorophyll. And so let's see, Rod, what's the role of chlorophyll in a plant? I can't hear you. Let's see. Chris, do you want to weigh in? What's the role of chlorophyll in a plant?
Does it store food?
Yeah, so basically, you're on the right track. What it does is the chlorophyll is kind of the green component of the plant, right? And it is able to take sunlight and convert it into carbohydrates for the plant. And so without magnesium, the plant can't do that. And so magnesium is needed for basically the photosynthetic process in the plant. All right. Calcium is important for cell wall structure. And let's see. Madison, have you ever heard of turgidity? It's kind of, maybe write this one down. I doubt you guys have. So turgidity is basically the ability of the plant to stand upright, okay? And that turgidity comes because a plant has cell walls that have a cell wall. And those cell walls enable that plant to stand upright. You and I have a skeleton, and that allows us to stand upright. But plants have cell walls, and an important part of that cell wall is the calcium. If there's not enough calcium, the plants can't stand up straight. And when they do that, they'll lay over, and they're not turgid. So, an important part of turgidity. Okay, potassium is important for osmoregulation and cell division. Okay, so first, osmoregulation. This kind of controls the flow of water into the plant. And so if the potassium is deficient or missing, the plant has a hard time getting water into it. And then once the water does get in there, the cell division process, basically the plant's ability to divide, grow, get bigger, enlarge, is retarded as well. Okay, so that concludes, let me go back. These three right here, N, P, and S, and these three right here, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, are the macronutrients, okay? These others right here are what we call micronutrients. So compared to the previous 6, these guys are used in the plant in much smaller amounts. Now, one important thing that I want to say about that is that doesn't mean that they're not important, okay? And I want to introduce you to something here. If I can share Google here. There's a guy named Liebig, I think that's how you say that, and he invented what we call the law of the minimum. And there's a really good way to kind of show this, and what they use is kind of a barrel. Let me find a good picture of a barrel here. That's a good one. So if we're looking at like a barrel, okay, and we've got all these different plant nutrients, if we've got copper and zinc and phosphorus, potassium, and so on, what the law of the minimum says is that our yield, or in this case, the ability of the barrel to hold water, it depends on whichever slat is the lowest, right? So we could have all of the NPK, calcium, magnesium. We could have everything that we need. All of our macronutrients are taken care of. But let's say that one of our micronutrients like zinc, or let's say this one right here was maybe manganese. It doesn't matter if everything else is high. If we don't have any manganese, our yield's going to be hurt because of that. Does that make sense? So really, the law of the minimum is whatever is available to the plant in the least amount is going to be the deciding factor in how well our plants grow. All right. Law of the minimum. And so in this case, right, we've got micronutrients. They're just as important as the macronutrients. They're just used in lesser amounts. Okay. Boron is kind of an interesting study. It's used for pollen tube formation and also in germination for the plant. We'll see this every once in a while in like a corn plant. You guys know that the silks on a corn plant are basically just pollen tubes, right? And if boron is lacking, it really hampers the seed formation. So if we're growing any kind of a grain crop, we want to be sure that our boron levels are sufficient in order to get a nice formation of the actual grain that we're harvesting. Okay, molybdenum. Now, if you guys go into your books and read up on the nitrogen cycle, and specifically read about our symbiosis with nitrogen fixing bacteria. One of the things that they do is that they're able to take nitrogen, and what they'll do is they'll reduce it. Okay, and in order to do that, there has to be a sufficient amount of molybdenum in there. And what I mean by reduce is, a plant can take up nitrate, right? But it has to be converted into an organic or a reduced form of nitrogen in order to be utilized in the plant. So this reductase, that's what it does, is it takes nitrate, reduces it to ammonium, and then reduces it to some other organic compound, which then gets used in the plant. All right, zinc is used for protein synthesis and hormone and starch production. Okay. We won't dwell on many of these too much. This is the form that boron's taken up as an anion. And these guys right here are all taken up. Why did we not show oh, there they are. Molybdenum is taken up as a cation. Zinc is a cation. Okay. These others are used in photosynthesis: manganese, chloride, and copper. And then iron is an important component of chlorophyll formation. So pretty similar to, what was the other one that was used in chlorophyll? I think that was magnesium, right? So iron and magnesium kind of have a similar role in the chlorophyll world. All right. Chloride's the only one of these that's an anion. The other ones are cations that are taken up by the plant. All right. Now, this table right here, it speaks to how these elements behave in the soil. All right. And it also speaks to how they behave in the plant. And when we talk about these, we usually talk in terms of their mobility. So let's look at nitrogen. And let's look specifically with nitrate, because we know a lot about nitrate already, right? Because it leaches. And so we know this already, right? That nitrate is mobile in the soil. That means it can leach, it can move around. It's also fairly mobile within the plant, okay? And so if we know that something is mobile or immobile in the plant, it tells us a lot about where we can find certain deficiencies. Let's look at a few of these other ones. Okay, phosphorus, anion, yet it's very immobile in the plant. That's interesting. The reason it's very immobile is because phosphorus, and especially these two forms of phosphorus, they're what we call the marrying type. Okay, they don't like to be alone. And so what happens is phosphorus in the soil, it likes to hitch up with either a calcium or magnesium or maybe an iron or an aluminum. And once it does that, it basically turns into a rock and it can't go anywhere. So usually we consider phosphorus to be highly immobile in the soil. Whereas in the plant, okay, in the plant, it likes to move around. And so we can say with a little bit of surety that phosphorus is mobile within the plant. You kind of get a feel for how that works with this table right here. Okay. Most of the micronutrients are very immobile. So if you look at copper down through zinc, okay, both immobile in the soil and in the plant. And then boron is mobile in the soil, but not in the plant. So let's break this down a little bit. If I can share another screen here. Okay, let's say we've got a plant growing here. Sorry, guys, I'm not a very good drawer. There's a plant. And we got roots down here. So, knowing how things move into the plant, let's divide this plant into half. Okay. And what we're going to expect to see is if the nutrient is mobile, deficiency symptoms are going to show up down here. Okay. So we know that within the plant, NPK and magnesium, if my memory serves me right, these are the guys that are mobile within the plant. So what that means is that if new growth is happening and the plant says like, whoa, I am low on nitrogen, what it can do is it can scavenge from down here in this older tissue, and it can translate that nitrogen up to these newer tissues. And when it does that, the newer tissue turns nice and green, okay? And the lower tissue, it gets starved of nitrogen and is going to start to look yellow and necrotic and things like that. And so if we go out into our field and we look at a plant and the bottom of it is turning yellow, immediately we can say, all right, if the lower leaves are turning a shade of yellow, we're most likely missing one of these guys right here. Now, all the others, I've kind of presented this a little bit backwards, okay? Because we're going to be looking for deficiency symptoms of NPK and magnesium down here, and all the others we're going to be looking for up here. So as the plant grows, maybe the old growth has, let's use sulfur as an example, okay? As it grows, it's got plenty of sulfur, and it gets to kind of a point where it needs more sulfur, okay? Because that sulfur is immobile in the plant, now the yellowing is going to show up in the top of the plant. And that's where we're going to look for deficiencies for all these other guys, is in the new growth. Would you guys be interested in looking at some different deficiency symptoms? Good, I thought so. So let me go back here. Clear that screen and go back to here. All right, I'm going to pick two people, and you're going to tell me a nutrient. One of you is going to tell me a nutrient, one of you is going to tell me a crop, and we're going to look at how that nutrient and crop shows up in terms of deficiency. So let's see. David, tell me a crop. I can't hear you. Okay, no David. Mackenzie, tell me a crop.
Corn.
Corn, good. And Garrett, tell me a nutrient.
Calcium.
Okay, you guys can do this on your own too, right? You can look up some of these deficiency symptoms. But let's go back here for just a second. Okay. Go to the end here. And calcium in the plant is very immobile. Okay. And so we know right off the bat that if we've got a calcium deficiency, we're more than likely going to have to see it in the newest growth. So let's Google this and look at some images here. Let's see. You have to be careful because sometimes they like to trick you. I don't know if that's calcium or not. Okay, here's a calcium deficiency. So look at our older tissues right here. See how those are nice and green? And then as we move up the stalk, those things are turning a shade of yellow. Okay, this is a good example of calcium deficiency. I think there were a few others on here. What's this one right here? Too slow. I thought I saw a sulfur one somewhere. That's the same picture we just looked at, isn't it? Here's an interesting one. Here's a zinc deficiency in corn. You notice the striping? And it gets worse as you move up the stalk there. That's interesting. Oh, here's a sulfur deficiency right here. Again, if we go back to our the slide right here, sulfur, you'll remember, where's sulfur? What a crappy table. It doesn't even have sulfur on here. Sulfur is not mobile in the plant. And so we shouldn't be surprised when we see the newest leaves turning yellow. Okay, let's move on to another one. Chris, pick a crop.
Alfalfa.
Joe, pick a nutrient.
Molybdenum.
Oh my gosh. I knew you were going to say that. Yeah, thanks for spelling it out for me. Molybdenum. It's the only way to remember that. Okay, molybdenum. We know that that is one of the nutrients that is immobile in the soil, I think. It's on our chart here. It is not, but I know that it's immobile. So we're likely going to see these deficiencies in the newer growth. So let's look at this one. Yeah, I could buy that, right? So as we move up the alfalfa plant here, we're going from darker green and it's getting lighter as we move up. This is old school right here. This is like from when I went through college. This is kind of as they look as a whole, you know, just sufficient versus deficient. Does that kind of make sense? You guys get a feel for, you know, what I do is I memorized, all right? I know that NPK and magnesium are mobile in the plant. And so those, I'm going to look in older tissue to see if there's a deficiency symptom. Let's look at nitrogen deficiency in corn. Just, it's pretty common. Okay, here's a good one right here. So we can see, again, older tissue down here is turning yellow, and it's a little bit greener as we move up the plant. This is pretty severe right here. Here we go, yellowing down here, and then it gets greener as it moves up the plant. So, yeah. Let's look at one more. And this one is easy to identify. A caveman could do this one. Okay, phosphorus deficiency. Okay, remember, phosphorus is mobile in the plant, right? And so our newest tissues are stealing from the older guys and look nice and green. But phosphorus deficiency in a lot of plants comes back as this purpling color. And you'll see this quite a bit, especially in like really young corn plants. A lot of the times they'll grow out of it, but you can see this purpling, and it's a telltale sign of phosphorus deficiency. Pretty, right? Well, if you're growing the corn, you probably don't think it's that pretty, but you know, usually, you know, like I said, this will usually grow out of it. And so I don't think that, you know, if a grower went out and put some extra P on this corn plant it's probably going to snap out of it and do quite well. I don't think it's gotten to the point yet where the plant's going to shrivel up and die and have a yield loss because of it. Any others you guys want to see?
Does it turn purple because of the lack of chlorophyll?
I don't know why it turns purple. It probably has something to do with the chlorophyll, but there's probably some pigmentation changes that are happening in the plant as well. But again, remember that P is important for energy transfer and ATP. And so I guess, they look kind of weak and wimpy. Purple means wimpy, right? Let's look at something weird. Let's look at P deficiency in bananas. Holy crap, that's turning purple too, isn't it? And it's in the older tissue. Dang. So yeah, pretty consistent. Let's look at a fun one. This one's fun. Let's look at chloride deficiency in wheat. Ooh, look at that. Well, that didn't work. You get this speckling, okay? Speckling in wheat plants is because of chloride deficiency. It's interesting. Now, one thing that, before we end here, we're almost done. I'm just kind of dinking around here. But one thing I want to impress upon your minds, let's go back to corn for a minute. And let's look at some of the micronutrients. Let's look at zinc. Okay, a lot of the times these deficiency symptoms will show up as striping. Okay, this is zinc right here, right? Let's change this to manganese and see how that looks. Striping. So if you think that you or anybody else can take a look at a striped plant and say, oh, that's zinc 100%, or that's manganese 100%, or it's iron. Let's look at iron. It might be a little bit different, but you still get striping. Okay. One of the things that we do is we can do analysis on the leaf tissue, and that helps us greatly to diagnose what the problem is. Because to be quite honest, again, I've been doing this for 20 years. I can't look at a corn plant and I can't tell the difference between a zinc, a manganese, an iron, or a copper deficiency. They all look the same to me. Okay, you can do it with phosphorus pretty easy. Nitrogen and potassium look somewhat similar, but there's tests out there that we can run on these tissues to help us get a better feel for what the deficiency actually is. Because if we're relying just on the judgment of our eyes, I don't think it works very well. See, a lot of these look, I don't know, they make these images that make it look so obvious, but it's not. Okay. Every year somebody brings me a corn plant with stripes on it, and they're like, I can't decide if this is zinc or manganese. And it's like, well, let's test it and find out. It could be both. So, all right, I'm done for today. Do you guys have any questions? Any other crops that you want to look at?
Would the stripes be worse if it was both?
Absolutely, it could be. Yep. And, another point to make is that because we don't always know what micronutrient deficiency we're dealing with, if you go out and want to buy, say, a zinc fertilizer for your field, your agronomist is probably going to sell you a cocktail of micronutrients that'll have zinc in it. It'll probably have manganese and copper in it as well. And so you usually generally solve the problem, but we don't exactly know what it was to begin with. So it's a little bit tricky. Micronutrients are tricky. They're hard to diagnose. And anyway, that's why they sell micronutrients as mixes quite often. Good question. Any others? Okay, well, let's see. Today's Wednesday. We will meet back tomorrow and go into a little bit more detail on some of the nutrients. Okay. All right. Hasta mañana.